Hi, this is Randy from the Eric W. Gritsch Memorial Fund, and we're meeting today with Brach Jennings in Germany. Brach's the second winner of the Eric W. Gritsch Fellowship for Reformation History and Theology. He went to Germany to do research and just never came back. Some of his findings and research are on our website, ericwgritsch.org, and now that we have you in person long distance, we hope you can tell us a little bit about your experience so far.
I would love to, and thank you, Randy, and to the Gritsch Fund for your willingness to meet with me by long distance, given the current things that we are going through worldwide, health-wise. Last year, I came to Germany on the 7th of April, 2019, that would be, and for what I believed at the time would be one semester. And I was to study with Professor Jürgen Moltmann for the semester, who had very graciously agreed to be my co-supervisor for my dissertation at the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago. This was a huge honor for me to spend a semester with Dr. Moltmann. It was a huge honor for me, and is to have been given the Gritsch Fund, with which enabled me to come and spend the semester in Tübingen. And as I got here, and as I got settled into the Evangelisches Stift Tübingen, which is the equivalent of a Lutheran seminary, but it's not really what we would think of as a Lutheran seminary, but historically that's what it is. As I got settled here, and as I got to know Dr. Moltmann, it became clear to me that I wanted to ask him to be my main supervisor on my dissertation rather than my co-supervisor. And that would mean to come to Tübingen full-time and to leave LSTC and to study with him. My advisor in Chicago, the wonderful womanist theologian Linda Thomas, had encouraged me to do this, encouraged me very enthusiastically, as a matter of fact, you know, to, if you can stay, stay. And in the middle of May, so it's just about coming up on a year, I asked Dr. Moltmann if he would take me as a student here, and he said yes. I was completely shocked. This was and is my favorite living theologian, whose writings shaped me so much as a young student at both Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary in Berkeley and at Luther Seminary, which were the two institutions where I did my initial studies, one for an MDiv and the other for a Master of Theology. And now Dr. Moltmann had agreed to take me as his doctoral student, and I already was his student, right? We had already worked that out, but this was a whole different thing. It meant a new school. It meant a new culture. I'm familiar with Germany. Actually, I had been here before when I was young, actually, and intellectually I was quite shaped by and large by the German theological tradition, but this was a whole new thing to actually stay here. So in other words, it didn't take very long for me to realize that Tübingen was actually where I belonged for my doctorate. And it was something that, had things not have played out as they did, I wouldn't have known that this was even a possibility. And so maybe, I don't know if you want me to tell the story of how I met Dr. Moltmann originally. I don't know if you know that story. Do you, Randy?
No, go ahead, please.
All right. So at Luther Seminary, I did the Master of Theology degree following my MDiv. I just mentioned that. And in my thesis, which was just 106 pages or something, I used Luther, Paul Tillich, and Jürgen Moltmann as a way of constructing a contemporary theology of the cross as a critique of consumerism and capitalism. I'm of the generation who was in university when the 2008 recession hit, and right when I went to seminary, the Occupy Wall Street movement erupted. So this was in my both intellectual and spiritual formation. This economic critique was kind of always there, and so I wanted to explore that in my master's work. And I wrote it, and I actually passed the thesis with honors, and was encouraged to send it to Dr. Maltman. This is back in 2017. And so, trembling from head to foot, I mailed off my thesis to him, and he responded very positively and encouraged me to publish it. I did actually do that. I published an excerpt of it. My article on Paul Tillich is taken from the chapter of that thesis on Tillich. I didn't publish the whole thing because I wanted to keep some of that to rework for my dissertation, which I'm currently doing actually. But I did publish a piece of it, and he wanted me to let me know about my theme for my, or let him know about my theme for my dissertation. And so it was clear that the letter that I received from him would not be my only communication with him. And I was sitting with my master dissertation advisor in St. Paul, that's Guillermo Hansen. And because Guillermo had this letter from Maltman, Maltman had unfortunately lost my address. By that time, I was at LSTC, initially studying with Vitor Vestela, who died subsequently of cancer. It was devastating. But I was sitting with Guillermo, and I said to him, we were having dinner, and I said, I think I should visit Maltman. And Guillermo agreed. And in amongst all of this, so I wrote Maltman again, asking him if I could visit him, and I didn't hear back for a few months. And then Vitor died on the 13th of May, 2018. And Linda Thomas then became my advisor at my request. And she and I had already been forming a relationship at LSTC, and I was fascinated by her work, and we just got along quite well. And so that was logical to me to want to work with her. And she told me, you need to go to Maltman and ask him to take you as a student. So this is 2018. And I did ask that question, but not quite as strongly as perhaps I could have at the time. I asked him to be on my committee, which is a different question than, will you take me as your doctoral student? So that's July of 2018 that I actually meet with Maltman, and he agrees to, and then in December he agreed to co-supervise my dissertation with Dr. Thomas, and that's when I applied to the Gritsch Fund for the fellowship for Reformation history and theology. And I sent, that was another thing I sent in the mail kind of trembling, because I thought, well, I'm not a historian. I like to think of myself as a historically interested and fascinated, and even now, and I'll explain why in a minute, even now historically grounded systematician, but I'm a systematician, right? And so I thought, is this gonna work? But there was that clause in there that said Reformation history or theology. I said, oh, well, then I'm okay then, because I do write on Reformation theology. And I got the announcement from all of you, from the fund, which was an incredibly joyous occasion in my apartment at LSTC. Of course, I called Dr. Thomas instantly and told her that that I had gotten it, and so I knew I could come for a semester. And then that's when after I got here, and already had established that Maltman would be in my life, in my academic life, in ways that I never would have imagined possible, right? Then I decided to ask the final question, which was, can I come to Tübingen? And so he said yes. He wrote me a little, I read him my dissertation proposal first, and then he wrote me, that's on the Gritsch website, by the way, you guys have that. That was the version I gave to him. I changed it a little bit when I had to use it for something else, but that was essentially what I was thinking of at the time. It's been a year, so I've shifted a little bit, obviously, as one does. What it says on paper isn't always what happens in reality, but that's basically what I'm doing, which is a Lutheran theology of the cross, to put Luther in dialogue with James Cone, with the overall theme of Holy Saturday. But I want to go back to this this acceptance by the Protestant faculty of Tübingen, because I made the comment a second ago, a historically grounded systematic theologian, and I promised I would explain why. I asked the excellent Reformation historian Volker Lepine to be my secondary dissertation supervisor. And he said yes. And in the I started working with him officially in October. So in these last however many months that's been, I only had one class in math in college, so somebody help me out how many months that is. Randy, the expression that you're giving me right now tells me that I'm okay. In however many months this is, I have turned to not a historical reconstruction, but a sensitivity to the context of what Luther was writing out of for the portions of Luther that I'm using in my dissertation. And that's particularly through the work of the excellent Lutheran systematician Oswald Bayer. He became quite important to my work, and so that's one thing that wasn't originally in there. I didn't have really a methodology for reading Luther, and now I do. I spent an evening with Professor Bayer in Tübingen in January. It was fabulous. We had red wine, we listened to Glenn Gould playing Bach, and we talked about Luther all evening. I can think of a few things that are more fun. So I did notice a slight shift from what I was doing before into that I really was trying to take the historical context of Luther more seriously than I was in Chicago. In Chicago, I wasn't discounting it, but it was more of an existentialist reframing of Luther, and I sort of put that aside to get a more embodied work going on, which is so crucial for James Cone. And so this all still plays together for me. And as the year has gone on, I become, increasingly sort of fascinated with how you can link the best of Luther's thought to James Cone as the notion of election is translated and transformed through Karl Barth. And that was one thing that Jürgen Moltmann really steeped me in over this last year is Karl Barth. He noticed in my work up to that point, I had been, in his words, neglecting Karl Barth, and that was correct. I just had never gotten around to it. I was reading other systematicians, and I was a Lutheran, and I privileged the Lutheran writers, except Cone, of course, being the exception. But mostly I privileged the Lutherans. And so with Dr. Moltmann, I began to see how Barth could be the bridge from Luther to Cone, because James Cone did his dissertation on Karl Barth and respected him deeply, even though took a critical position against him. He basically played Karl Barth like the blues. He said something like that one time. And, so he took what he needed, and the rest of it he left behind. But, Cone read the entirety of the Church Dogmatics for his doctorate. And so now, as I'm reading Barth, I'm asking the question, all right, how does this fit together? And how is it dissonant from Luther, right? There are some significant parts, particularly around the hidden God, where Karl Barth has no time for the hidden God, and the hidden God is so crucial to Luther in writings like The Bondage of the Will. And so I spent, a fair bit of time just digging into Luther's Bondage of the Will. I wasn't quite brave enough to do it in Latin. I did do it in German, though, which is something I wouldn't have done before. And so it's been an adventure of ideas for me. I'm not quite, ironically, I'm not quite to Cone yet, because I've had to spend all this time on Luther, and then Bart and Holy Saturday is sort of, in there whenever I get time to work on it. I did work on Bart with Dr. Maltman. As a matter of fact, that's almost all we did last summer was Bart. It was just every week I was reading from the German. He hands me 2.2 of the Church Dogmatics in German and says, read 100 pages in the next 3 weeks. That was my trial by fire for German, which I thought it was going to kill me at the time, honestly. Now I'm not so timid around academic German. And I've built in the last year, I built a nice German library, actually, because books pop up for free here in the Stift all the time. And it's these German theological classics and the used bookstores in Germany, things that as Americans would cost us, $50, I paid €6 for. And that's not an exaggeration. There's a text, the Lutheran Bartian, Walter von Löweneck, he has a book, Luther's Theology of the Cross. I literally paid, I think, $50 for that English version when I was a student at Luther. I walked into the bookseller in Tübingen, which is just 5 minutes away from where I live, and I paid €6 for it. So that's a way of saying, as a Reformation theologian, Tübingen is heaven in terms of these classic dogmatic texts that I sort of just have to know and have to work with in order to be able to flip them and to critique them and to, say, well, all right, this is where we need to leave this behind and grab this and all of that. I've got to know what I'm doing before I try to do that kind of work. And so the doctorate is a wonderful way to do that. And so I started as a Gritsch Fellow for a course at LSTC, but really, retroactively, I was a Gritsch Fellow to begin my doctorate in Tübingen, which is so funny to say because I was clueless to that at the time. And so as a doctoral student in Germany, I have no courses, which is, I've had so many courses over my rather long academic formation at this point that it's kind of nice to not have them anymore, and I can go if I want. In other words, you can go to lectures or, whatever is sort of interesting. Last semester, I did Volker Leppine's Reformation History Seminar, and that culminated in me taking a look at this book here that Lepine had recommended to me. I'm probably finished tomorrow. First book I've ever read on John Calvin. I've been studying theology for going on 9 years, and I'd never read a book on John Calvin. Something is wrong with this picture. So I wanted to remedy that little problem, and I'm actually quite enjoying it. So it's called John Calvin, A Pilgrim's Life by Hermann J. Zelderhuis, Selderhuis. So that's my newest discovery. And that helps me also to sort of frame Bart, because Bart is working with and critiquing Calvin as well as Luther. So all this runs together. But that's just to say, as a doctoral student in Germany now, I have a great deal of freedom. I have no deadlines. No deadlines, quote unquote. I certainly make myself deadlines, but it's not like, you have to do this before you do this. It's not a structured program. I meet with Dr. Maltman once a month and tell him what I've done, and I just keep plugging away. I'm studying Hebrew now. I began that in February for an intensive course, but that was a little overambitious. It was a 6-week, 3.5 hours a day Hebrew course in German. Perhaps that was a little much. So I have gone back to Hebrew now and am doing the semester-long course. And now it's much more manageable. and it's gone back to being fun rather than in the last, few weeks of it where I thought it was going to kill me in the intensive course. And now it's like, okay, by the end of the semester, I'm confident I'll be able to take a reading exam. Because for the German theology doctorate, you have to have Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. And we can thank Philip Melanchthon for that. And I live, I'm trying to figure out my horrible sense of direction. So Melanchthon, where he taught, if my direction, which is bad, is right, is that way by about 30 seconds. You go out and you go to the philosophy building, which is called the Börse, and there Melanchthon was at. And they have a nice sign. I put a picture of that on my page on the Gritsch website. Here lived and worked Philip Melanchthon. And so his influence is still felt in that all the theology candidates for the pastorate and those of us getting doctorates from this faculty have to have Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. So I did some Latin in the fall. That's another thing that I will do again. So I'm kind of doing a pattern, right? Do it twice rather than once. I had Greek when I was at PLTS, so that for me is not entirely foreign. I've been brushing up Greek as well as one can with everything else I'm doing on my own a little bit every day, mostly every day. And I love it here. I'm very much thrilled. I'm glad I asked the question to Dr. Maltman if he would take me. And certainly some days have been hard because with the no deadlines, you have to be incredibly self-motivated, or as I tell people, it's like the biggest independent study you've ever done. Is the German theological doctorate. And ironically, when I first came to Tübingen, I was here to do an independent study with Dr. Maltman from LSTC. And I did leave with a third master's degree from LSTC with a second master of theology. So I do get to say I am an alum of LSTC. I just didn't take the doctorate from them. So that's fun. I guess I run well in Lutheran circles, thus making my John Calvin book and my Reformed supervisor in Dr. Maltman especially ironic. The other thing I ought to say about my studies is I'm very, very pleased that Linda Thomas is remaining a vital part of my work. She will be an outside examiner per my request and Dr. Maltman's approval. And when I begin work on my Cone chapter, which hopefully, God willing, will be this fall, I'll be done with Luther and I'll be ready to go to Cone. Dr. Maltman will have me meet with Dr. Thomas for, I think if he had his druthers, it would be every week with her. And then I would meet once a week or once a month with him. So, and Dr. Thomas and I still stay very much in contact, and I'm glad for that. So I have a German systematician, a Reformation historian, and a womanist theologian and anthropologist that comprises my doctoral readers. And it's like making a nice stew and putting everything together and hope something good comes out of it. And ironically, I don't cook very well in the literal sense of the word, so I'm sure hoping I cook metaphorically well. But it seems to be going okay.
So far, so good. We were very interested at the Gritsch Fund in the whole liberation theology and your work on with James Cone, who you've actually met with and everything. And I'd like to hear a little bit about the connection between James Cone, Karl Barth, and Luther himself. If you could sort of bridge that for us, how your thinking goes, that would be great.